For more than 2 centuries, the Tokugawa shogunate enforced a rigid feudal order from Edo. It was a sepia-toned hierarchy. Daimyo ruled domains, and samurai lived on fixed rice stipends under bakufu supervision. That policy of sakoku, imposed in the early 1600s and effectively intact until 1853, kept foreign influence at bay, but also ossified institutions. In the decades before 1868, strains mounted. Rural poverty, domain bankruptcy, and samurai malaise as fixed stipends could not keep pace with inflation or the cost of modern weapons. The immediate shock came with Commodore Matthew C. Perry's arrival at Uraga on July 8, 1853, and his return in 1854, which forced the Convention of Kanagawa on March 31, 1854, and opened Shimoda and Hakodate as treaty ports. Concessions widened with the 1858 Treaty of Amity and Commerce negotiated by Townsend Harris, creating unequal treaty ports including Edo, Yokohama, Nagasaki, and Niigata, and eroding Bakufu authority. The Bakumatsu era, roughly 1853 to 1867, turned political fault lines into open rivalry. The imperial court in Kyoto under Emperor Komei, who reigned from 1846 to 1867, embraced Sono Joy, revere the emperor, expel the barbarians, while other leaders urged adopting Western science and military techniques to survive. Domains that drove change crystallized power in the southwest. Satsuma, Kagoshima, led by Saigo Takamori and Okubo Toshimichi. Choshu, present-day Yamaguchi, energized by Kido Takayoshi and Takasugi Shinsaku, and Tosa, Kochi, home to reformists like Sakamoto Ryoma. These domains experimented with rangaku, Western shipbuilding, and modern armaments, building clandestine coalitions and modern armies after clashes such as the 1864 bombardment of Shimonoseki. By the late 1860s, the stage was set. A gilded, creaking political theater where ideology, restoration of imperial rule versus preservation of the bakufu, collided with the realities of gunpowder, steam, and treaty-imposed humiliation, making systemic change not just possible but inevitable. On November 9, 1867, Tokugawa Yoshinobu carried out the Taisei Hokan, formally returning political authority to the emperor in a gilded, calculated gesture meant to preserve Tokugawa prestige while avoiding outright rupture. Yoshinobu expected a negotiated transition. He gave up the bakufu's formal powers, but sought guarantees for Tokugawa status, domains, and a continuing role within a restructured government centered on Kyoto. The imperial court in Kyoto, now dominated by the Satsuma Choshu coalition, accepted the return as a political victory, but refused to treat it as a surrender of initiative. Leaders like Saigo Takamori of Satsuma, Okubo Toshimichi, and Kido Takayoshi of Choshu pushed for swift, irreversible reform. Those men had spent the 1860s building modern battalions in Kagoshima and Hagi, importing steamships and Western rifles, and they saw compromise as a cover for Tokugawa revival. Tensions hardened in the winter of 1867 to 1868 as rival camps quarreled over appointments, the composition of an imperial guard, and control of Kyoto's defenses. Assassinations and lamplit intrigues sharpened the air. On December 10, 1867, Sakamoto Ryoma, a broker of Satsuma Choshu cooperation, was killed in Kyoto, a stark signal that politics had turned deadly. In late January 1868, the fragile detente shattered. Shogunal forces still loyal to the Tokugawa house and drawn from Tokugawa and allied domains moved toward Kyoto to assert control. The Satsuma Choshu alliance rose to meet them in a decisive, iron-weathered confrontation on the plains near Toba and the Fushimi suburbs. The Battle of Toba-Fushimi, fought January 27th to 31st, 1868, crystallized the split. Imperial troops influenced by Saigo Takamori and Choshu veterans engaged shogunal units in close, chaotic combat among rice paddies, temples, and river crossings. The imperial side's modernized artillery, disciplined infantry, and crucial defections by wavering domains turned the tide. Several contingents that had marched under the shogun's banner changed sides or melted away under pressure. Subscribe. Maybe it would have kept a few contingents on the shogun's side. By January 31st, the shogunate's field army had collapsed into disorder and retreat, and Tokugawa authority, already ceremonial after the Taisei Hokan, was battered into practical impotence. Yoshinobu withdrew to Edo to regroup, but the myth of Bakufu invincibility lay in tatters. The rapid erosion of shogunal control after Toba Fushimi converted a brittle political settlement into open dissolution and set a relentless tempo. Provinces would either bow to the emergent Meiji center or be swept into civil contest. The next chapter would be a southern march on Edo and the wrenching dismantling of the old feudal order. After the Toba Fushimi battles, the Imperial coalition moved from battlefield momentum to bureaucratic inevitability. By seizing Kyoto's moral high ground, they turned military victory into legal authority. On April 6, 1868, the new government in Kyoto issued the Charter Oath in the name of Emperor Meiji, Mutsuhito. That 5-article manifesto promised deliberative assemblies, merit-based appointment, the abolition of obsolete class restrictions, and an openness to foreign knowledge. The Charter Oath became a gilded warrant for rapid reform and a moral center for domains to rally around. Saigo Takamori, Okubo Toshimichi, and Kido Takayoshi converted battlefield control into administrative command. They sent imperial envoys to daimyo across the archipelago and ordered registers, tax rolls, and arms inventories turned over to Kyoto's authorities. The document's language was classical and august, but its practical effect was immediate. It undercut the bakufu's claim to monopoly and presented a persuasive, if fragile, case that modern governance must replace hereditary paralysis. The change was visible on the battlefield as well. Armies from Satsuma, Choshu, and Tosa drilled in European-style line and column tactics. Militia innovations such as Choshu's Kihei Tai had already introduced mixed-rank volunteer units armed with Enfield rifles and breech-loading Armstrong artillery, and those weapons began to appear across the plains and river crossings where the new regime asserted control. Steam did for strategy what rifled muskets did for tactics. Steam warships and transports compressed distance along the inland sea and the Tokaido, enabling rapid redeployment of troops, coastal blockades, and the shipment of heavy ordnance that feudal roads could not bear. Under this new tempo, domains were forced to pick sides. Long-standing loyalties fractured when the inducement of legal recognition from Kyoto collided with the practical threat of modern firepower. Wealthy clans such as Kaga, Maeda, and Tosa declared for the emperor after calculated consultations, while northern and northeastern fiefs like Aizu and Sendai resisted and later coalesced into the Oetsu Reppon-dome. In castle towns and domain councils, the arithmetic was simple. Where Enfield rifles and steam transports could be mustered, Tokugawa-era authority unraveled. Where traditional levies remained, conflict hardened. Negotiations and saber diplomacy continued in parallel. Katsu Kaishu negotiated with imperial commanders over Edo's fate, even as troops massed on the approaches to the city. By late spring 1868, Kyoto's proclamations and the iron, steam, and gunpowder of modern arsenals had turned a political coup into a national seizure of power, setting the country inexorably toward Edo and the climactic unmaking of the bakufu's sepia-lined order. Edo became the fulcrum where negotiation and annihilation teetered. After imperial forces secured Kyoto and the Charter Oath on April 6, 1868, imperial columns pointed east, and the corridors of Edo filled with rumor, powder, and battered courtiers. Katsu Kaishu, the naval commander and Tokugawa negotiator, understood that street-to-street fighting in Japan's teeming capital would slaughter tens of thousands, raze temples, and shatter any claim to civil legitimacy. He opened parleys with Saigo Takamori in the first days of May to avert that ruin. Saigo, who had ridden the victory at Toba Fushimi and who commanded the imperial advance, faced his own calculus. A negotiated surrender would secure imperial authority, preserve the palace's dignity, and spare the populace the siege's grisly arithmetic, while a wholesale assault would prove the new regime's brutality before it had the apparatus to govern. The talks were terse and iron-willed, anchored by practical facts. Tokugawa forces could hold Edo's walls, river crossings, and garrisoned castles. Imperial troops controlled the approaches by sea with steam corvettes and by land with modern infantry. On May 3, 1868, Katsu and Saigo concluded terms that forced Yoshinobu and the Tokugawa household to relinquish Edo Castle without destroying the city, allowing many Tokugawa retainers to withdraw with arms and honor and preventing the conflagration commanders on both sides feared. That compromise did not end opposition. It merely shifted the battlefield north and hardened the hardliners. Matsudaira Katamori of Aizu, enraged by the bakufu's collapse and bound by duty and clan honor, refused to bow. In the rugged provinces of northeastern Honshu, domains coalesced into the Oetsu Reppon-dome, a desperate federative league that sought to hold a bastion against Kyoto's new writ. Admiral Enomoto Takeaki flatly rejected surrender at sea, seizing the remaining modern vessels of the Shogunate Navy and steaming north to Hakodate, Hokkaido, where he and samurai loyalists later declared the short-lived Republic of Ezo and fought the Battle of Hakodate in May and June 1869. The autumn of 1868 hardened into pitched sieges. Aizu's stand at Wakamatsu and the broader northern campaign, marked by the siege of Aizu in October and November 1868, turned ideological resistance into bloody conventional warfare. With Edo spared but the archipelago aflame, Saigo and Okubo faced a cruel verdict. The nation must be remade either through negotiated transfers that conserved lives and institutions, or through unrelenting force that would crush opposition but leave a charred legacy. That binary sharpened toward the coming climax as imperial policy shifted from conciliation to decisive military suppression of the northern fortress network. Negotiations that had dragged through April reached a decisive moment on May 3, 1868, when Katsu Kaishu formally accepted the transfer of Edo Castle from Tokugawa representatives. That handover, brokered between Katsu and Saigo Takamori and made possible by Tokugawa Yoshinobu's decision to avoid a cataclysm, unfolded with remarkable restraint. Imperial envoys entered the castle precincts while many Tokugawa retainers marched out with honors rather than corpses. Imperial troops, drilled like European soldiers and armed with Enfield rifles and Armstrong guns, filed through the gates as steam corvettes waited in the harbor. Armories, land registers, and tax rolls were placed under imperial control, and coastal batteries that had served the Bakufu fell silent. The symbolism was immediate and unmistakable. The shogunate's administrative center now bore imperial seals, publicly confirming Emperor Meiji's restoration and stripping Tokugawa rule of its last practical authority. Within days, Kyoto dispatched rescripts and emissaries across the provinces to secure compliance, depriving northern hardliners of the political capital they needed to rally. Emotionally, the scene was wrenching. Measured bows, samurai tears, and the sight of imperial standards replacing shogunal crests made the change feel real in a single solemn act. Practically, the surrender unlocked the administrative levers needed for reform: control of ports and steam routes, custody of budgets, and authority over appointments, which let Meiji leaders like Okubo, Kido, and Saigo turn the Charter Oath, April 6, 1868, into enforceable policy. By seizing Edo without wholesale ruin, the imperial government secured the means to abolish the Han in 1871, introduce conscription in 1873, reform the land tax, and build the modern ministries that would remake Japan. From the surrender of Edo, the new Meiji regime moved quickly and methodically to pacify the country. Imperial forces pursued holdouts north in the Ezo campaign, culminating in the Battle of Hakodate in May through June 1869, where Admiral Enomoto Takeaki's last shogunate fleet was defeated and Goryokaku fell on June 27, 1869. Politically, the Meiji leaders shifted from conquest to reconstruction. In 1871, the Han were abolished in the Heian Shiken and replaced by prefectures governed by centrally appointed officials, while budgets, cadasters, and ports were consolidated under ministries in Tokyo. That administrative reorganization unlocked sweeping reforms. The National Education Code Gakusei appeared in 1872, and Japan's first steam railway between Shimbashi and Yokohama opened on October 14, 1872, signaling a new tempo of infrastructure development. The Conscription Ordinance of 1873 created a national army, and land tax reform in 1873 stabilized revenue for industrial investment. The social cost was brutal. Samurai stipends and privileges were stripped away. The Haitere Sword Edict of 1876 banned most public carrying of swords, and revolts followed. The most famous was Saigo Takamori's Satsuma Rebellion of 1877, crushed at the Battle of Shiroyama. Rapid industrialization, centralized administration, and a modern military propelled Japan onto the world stage within decades. But that architecture of progress sat on a contested human ledger of lost status, uprooted lives, and bitter memory. What price modernization when an entire age dies so quickly?